of the discretionary budget. So when you hear people use words like sequestration and so forth, it's on the discretionary budget. So you're probably wondering, hey, what about my Social Security and what about Medicare, Medicaid? Those are mandatory spending items, which simply means that we have an obligation to fund them. So what you're hearing now in the process of what they're looking at in terms of the Affordable Care Act, they call it Obamacare, we call it ACA. What you have to realize on the ACA is how it interrelates with Medicare and Medicaid. But before I get to that, I'd like to explain to everyone what is going on, because I know you're probably watching the craziness of us in DC and going, what are they doing? You will hear very shortly the concept, you've heard it already, but I'll explain to you what it means. The concept of reconciliation. So, when the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010, remember this, I don't know if you remember the picture of Ted Kennedy basically coming in to cast that 60th vote to make the Affordable Care Act pass. Because you needed 60 Democrats in the Senate in order to stop the debate and get it to a vote. That's the end, so that they couldn't raise cloture. And on the House had the majority of Democrats at that time, and of course we had President Obama. So we sort of had this situation that we have now, only in the reverse. And they passed the Affordable Care Act. But soon after that, Senator Kennedy could not participate anymore, which meant the Republicans could step in and affect whatever may happen to the Affordable Care Act, because you needed 60. So there was this little known process called reconciliation, which is a budget measure. Both sides, both House and Senate, have to pass it. What is the significance? The major significance is the Senate can't block. It takes only 51 in the Senate, which means when you hear that, that the senators up there arguing and cloture is called and so forth, you can't do any of that with a reconciliation bill. But what does the reconciliation bill do, and where is it limited? It is limited. It can only increase or decrease spending. It can only increase or decrease revenues. And it can only increase or decrease our debt ceiling. And of some consolation is, this was a function of what they call the Budget Control Act of 1974, which had in it a prohibition that you cannot touch Social Security. Unfortunately, you can touch Medicare and Medicaid in reconciliation. So that is how this is all tied together. Because the reconciliation is going to go on the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, and potentially a subject of that reconciliation is Medicare and Medicaid. So let me get into what exactly, and Jerry touched upon it a little bit, but what is it that's at stake? You've heard the reference to Medicaid expansion. To show you how that's related to the Affordable Care Act, remember there was a big challenge to the Affordable Care Act that went to the United States Supreme Court. 1 hour or 4 hours of argument, I call it the Super Bowl of the Supreme Court. 1 hour of that argument was dedicated to Medicaid expansion. The beauty of Medicaid expansions was for those states that opted for it, like Hawaii, the feds pay 100% of that cost until the year 2020. And then it goes to about 90%. But 100% right now if you go in the Medicaid expansion. How does Medicaid expansion affect everyone? It has a major impact. For those of you who have grandchildren, you should know Hawaii is the only state in the nation that has 100% of our children covered with health insurance. Part of it is because of prepaid, but another part is something called S-chip. was the Children's Health Insurance Program. Creation of Hillary Clinton, by the way. That was one of her pet projects. With that, with Medicaid, they're 100% covered. Seniors who are in senior housing or skilled nursing and so forth that call upon Medicaid, that's also an issue that is covered. So you're talking about 50% of the Medicaid funds are used to assist seniors, a very critical part, especially for a state like Hawaii. How is that related to the Affordable Care Act? What is subject to repeal? And it is subject to repeal because they're challenging the Medicaid expansion, exactly those benefits. So you may think, we're Medicare, so how does Affordable Care Act play in? It plays in a great way. The second thing is Medicare itself. You have all heard, I know, because they publish it all the time. Social Security is good for X number of years, Medicare is good for X number of years, and that's because we're not doing a good job, et cetera, et cetera. Affordable Care Act is credited with extending the life of your Medicare benefits for 11 years because of the savings that are inherent in there. You heard about the donut hole. Under the Affordable Care Act, the donut hole, which is, let's backtrack on that. Part D was created when President George W. Bush was in office. The problem with Part D was that there was no pay for. In other words, it went into effect, great program, but there was no pay for. So in other words, we're always looking to how do we pay for Part D. What the Affordable Care Act did was not only figure out how to continue it with the savings that are inherent in it, is they also said by the year 2020, that donut hole will close. So every year up until 2020, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. What is the intent of President Trump's plan and the Republican plan? To repeal all of that. They also intend to repeal Medicaid expansion, which we talked about. So this is all under the, quote, reconciliation, which is really targeted at the Affordable Care Act. But you can see its impact and how it's going to domino this impact all the way down, and how it really comes down to Medicare and how your benefits are going to be affected. Medicaid is definitely going to be affected.